Hi again, it's Doc with Fossil Creek Nursery. Today we're going to talk about pruning and go through some of the major facts to understand. This is a great time to prune. We're here on a day before a snowstorm, but it is still late spring, or pardon me, late winter prior to spring, and things are just starting to bud out. So we're at the kind of the end of the pruning, the ideal pruning season. But now, with no leaves on the tree or the shrub, you can see what you're doing. You get to see the skeleton of the structure. When the leaves are all over a plant, sometimes it's hard to know which branch to prune or where, and we make big mistakes. There's no gluing it back once you do it. So it's ideal now. The other reason for doing it now is pathogens are not active during the cold weather in the winter and early spring. As a result, when we open a wound on a plant, we have no problems with fungal diseases that are airborne or bacterial blights to enter the plant and cause problems. First of all, it's a great season to prune, so we're focused on it. But we have to understand why we're going to prune and not just hack away. So one of the first things you should do without question is to understand each plant's natural growth pattern. That's not difficult. You can look it up or you can read the tag, which is certainly well advised. When you take it home, just don't tear it off and throw it away, or ask good questions of our very knowledgeable staff here at Fossil Creek before you go ahead and plant or purchase. So here's an example of a plant that does not want to grow upright. This is a juniper horizontalis, and that name tells us it grows sideways. Doesn't grow vertically, it grows horizontally. And this one doesn't get above 2 feet in its most mature state. So trying to train it like this is counterproductive, and the plant is always going to revert. So understanding that helps. This I've been pruning into a bonsai. I teach bonsai classes here, and I've been a bonsai artist for some decades. And this is an ideal plant for that, as is this Hinoki cypress, which looks like a small tree. But it was a big, bushy plant before I went to prune it with the intent of developing a bonsai that looks like a big tree but is in a small container. So the same goes for shrubs and trees. There are different reasons to prune, and there are different types of pruning techniques, and we're going to cover those today. So now we're going to talk about the tools we would use to prune. A lot of weekend gardeners or people that don't have experience in gardening, generally speaking, here in Colorado, we bike and we hike and we do a lot of other things, don't understand the value of having a tool supply that covers the bases. We don't do big branches with a tiny needle nose plier. That doesn't work at all. These are meant to get in tight spaces and to be able to do a light prune on a small branch. A quality pruner like this Felco, which is pretty much a top of the line pruner, hand pruner, kept clean and sharp, can prune a lot of branches, especially up to close to 3/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch in diameter. I would tend to stay around 1/2 inch and not go much higher than that with a good, sharp, clean tool. This is called a lopper. You can get into areas with much higher, but a much bigger branch, because you have the leverage of squeezing the long handles, and they cut cleaner. But if you have a dull tool in any one of these examples, from small to lopper, you are going to cause problems because you won't make a clean cut and therefore not a healthy cut. So we want to keep them clean and well oiled the screw and the bolt on the side tightened so that they keep the blades together rather than being apart as they're moving. We want them right next to each other, and we want to be able to use all three. Now the fourth one, I don't have the example here, is the very long bladed one with long blades at the top that we use to do shearing, like on a shear side of a hedge. So when you prune a hedge, a lot of people prune it in a vase shape. And this is a gigantic mistake. They will use the right long-bladed pruner, but when you do it this way instead of this way, the lower branches are shaded and they will lose foliage, and you'll have a bunch of low, sticky branches on the bottom without foliage, and it won't be a hedge anymore. It'll look like a bonsai plant. So we always prune hedges, or those things that we want to keep low foliage on, in a pyramidal shape, and you can make a flat top, but always the base is wider than the top, and it progresses more narrow the higher you go. So now you have 4 tools: sharpened, quality, and clean. And if you have that, you've got the makings of being a good pruner. So there are a lot of reasons to prune. One of them is an example here with this shrub. And this length is totally incongruous, not in keeping with the rest of the plant. It's gotten leggy, it's unattractive, it's going to use up a lot of energy, and we don't want it growing off by itself. So in most cases, you want an attractive, well-shaped plant. So pruning this would be rather logical. Some people would want it to grow in full, but with this one, we're going to take a good medium quality pruner, hand pruner, and we're going to be able to prune this down to a relative size of the other branches. Now, one thing to understand before we actually use this is where to prune on the plant. This is vital. Like the knuckles on your hand, only the knuckle will produce a branch or leaf. Everything in between the knuckles will not. So anywhere there's a bud on the plant is called a node, N-O-D-E. The space between the nodes, where there are no buds, is called logically an internode. Nothing grows out of the internode. So when you prune, you don't want to prune just below a node, because you leave all of that internode to die. Nothing will grow there, the plant won't nurture it, and you cause a place for disease to enter potentially. And it will be unattractive because you'll have a chunk of dead branch. So we always want to prune just above a node. So one of the things to look for now is relative congruity, a matching with the rest of the plant, and be able to prune either above an outward node or an internode or an inward node. And if you prune just above an inward node, the next growth is going to be forced out in this direction. So we select, and we want it to get a little fuller, so we can now prune just above a node, and we grow out and get a fuller, richer plant, and we're in relative balance with the rest of the plant. So here is another example of a taller, leggier plant, and actually with one having branches that are growing back into the shrub. We don't want that. So we're going to prune those just above an outward node, and it becomes so much easier to then allow that plant to grow properly. Here we can prune down just above this node, and now we have a little bit of uniformity. One point I do want to make, however, is if you get everything totally uniform, it looks like it's growing in the Garden of Versailles, where all they do is prune for fancy shapes and poodling the plant. When you prune, think about a natural look by getting things close as if nature was growing them, as opposed to you coming and giving it a butch haircut. So clearly this now has nothing growing back in that's going to cause problems. Very easily done. 3 pruning clips and we're good to go. So here we have a very different type of shrub. This is a dwarf version of our native red twig dogwood, and this one happens to have variegated leaves. It's called ivory halo, and it is a lovely small plant. But all of the cornice dogwoods that grow here natively and are hybrids of those are very full of branching, and they're somewhat erratic. They are not normally uniform in their growth. And if you come a little closer here, you can see some of the crisscrossing that occurs with branches that may have been a little bit lower originally and are reaching for the sun. So we have a few choices with a plant like this, and when it's small and planted at this size, it's best to start the pruning process so that once it starts to grow and fill in, and even if you remove a few of the branches here, it does not mean that you are stunting the growth by any means. You are reducing the foliage, but early on when you plant a fresh plant, it's all about the roots. Everything is about the roots. So we go into root development. We don't encourage a lot of top growth. We have enough leaves to photosynthesize. We feed enough nitrogen to make it right, but we establish those roots. So we get our clean, sharp, trusted pruner of quality, and we use that in the proper way to prune this as we did those tall plants. So we select a few of these down low that may in fact be growing erratically and may be in the way. And here is one, it's a small one, but it is growing so low on this main stem that it's providing some potential for rubbing and open injury as we let it mature. Now we have 2 sets of pruners. This is a needle nose, and now I can get in there with that one and quite readily prune that off. And again, clean it up just a little bit inside. Now, if you come closer again, I want to show you what I was talking about earlier. Do you see that? That is a dead piece of internode that was never pruned off, and it all died. So we don't want that to happen. We always prune down to the base. One of the other things to remember on a main branch where it attaches to the bigger trunk, there is something called a collar. And that collar looks like your knuckle when it crinkles up, any of your knuckles. You can identify them simply by looking at your hand because you can see the crinkle. That happens at the base of a main branch against the trunk. We never want to prune into that, and we never want to leave a big stub. We want to leave it just outside that collar, that wrinkled collar, and we want to be able to hang a baseball cap on it in a mild breeze and not have it fall off. If it is longer than that and the hurricane could come and the hat would still be there, you don't leave that stub. So prune her back just outside the collar. So here is another full one that we could do a little bit of pruning on, but in reality, this is a variety of plant that gets super full. It's one that is, you could maybe in a leaf, you couldn't even see the newspaper on the other side of it, no less read it. It's that full of foliage and branching. So in this case, We simply want to clean up a little bit internally, but not open it up totally internally. So in some cases, and again, I will use my small pruner here, we want to cut some of these internal smaller branches that are very close to the main branch so they don't rub. When branches mature, they don't stay this size. They get bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. And when they grow in close proximity, now you've got them widening into each other, and what happens is they rub against each other, they open a wound, and that again causes problems. And if you don't have a problem with a disease or an insect infestation, you have a problem with aesthetics and the general health of the plant. So in this case, we can do a little internal pruning and get a few of these branches off, get some of the lower ones that are growing down into the ground off, and with that, you generally have a plant you can allow to grow better into maturity. This one is fairly even, so there's no long leggy one I have to bring down, but if I wanted this to be a little fuller, I could prune just above a node, and those leaves will come out and fill a lot better.